The flames had already consumed everything Katherine Anders owned when she made the decision to run. Her bare feet hitting the scorched earth as the wagon's frame collapsed behind her with a thunderous crack that echoed across the Texas plains. She had been traveling alone from San Antonio to meet her brother in El Paso. A foolish decision, her father would have said, but he was 3 years in the ground, and her brother was all the family she had left. The year was 1876, and women were supposed to be delicate creatures who waited for men to solve their problems. But Katherine had never been good at waiting. She had saved for 2 years to buy that wagon and the supplies to make the journey, working as a seamstress until her fingers bled and her eyes strained in the lamplight. Now it was all ash and smoke, set ablaze by a cooking fire that had caught the wind wrong while she stepped away to gather more kindling. The shoes had been inside the wagon. So had her spare dress, her food, her water, and the small leather bag containing the last photograph of her parents. She stood in the darkness watching everything burn, the heat so intense it pushed her back 20 feet, then 30, then 50. When the front wheel finally gave way and the whole structure tipped sideways into the flames, Katherine turned west and started walking. She told herself she would find help by morning. The trail to El Paso was well traveled, and surely another wagon would come along soon. But morning came with a brutal sun that turned the landscape into a shimmering hell, and the only living things she saw were vultures circling high overhead, and a rattlesnake that sent her stumbling off the path, tearing the sole of her right foot on a jagged rock. By the second day, her lips had cracked and swollen. Her feet left bloody prints in the dust. She had tried wrapping them in strips torn from her petticoat, but the fabric shredded within hours, offering no protection against the rocks and thorns that littered the ground. Her dark hair, once pinned neatly beneath a bonnet that now existed only as melted wire in the ashes of her wagon, hung in tangled waves down her back. The sun had burned her face and arms until her skin felt tight and foreign. She should have stayed with the wagon. Someone would have seen the smoke, but panic had driven her forward, and stubborn pride kept her moving even when logic said to stop. By the third day, she was no longer thinking clearly. She talked to her mother, who had been dead for 5 years. She sang songs from her childhood in a voice like gravel. She counted her steps until the numbers stopped making sense. It was the 4th day when she fell and could not get up. Jacob Jensen had been tracking the Mustang herd for 3 days when he found her. He was 26 years old, a cowboy who worked the Triple Star Ranch just outside Sweetwater, Texas, and he had seen plenty of hard things in his life. But the sight of the woman lying face down in the dirt, her feet torn and bleeding, her dress scorched and filthy, her skin burned red by the merciless sun, made his stomach turn over. For a terrible moment, he thought she was dead. Then her hand twitched, fingers digging weakly into the earth, and Jacob was off his horse before he consciously decided to move. He dropped to his knees beside her, his shadow falling across her like a blessing, and carefully turned her onto her back. Her eyes opened, but he doubted she could see much. They were glazed with fever and dehydration, the pupils dilated and unfocused. Her lips moved, trying to form words, but only a rasping sound emerged. "Easy now," Jacob said, keeping his voice low and calm the way he would with a spooked horse. "I have got you. You are safe now." He reached for his canteen and held it to her lips, letting just a few drops of water trickle into her mouth. Too much too fast would make her sick, and she was already in bad enough shape. She swallowed reflexively, and her eyes cleared just enough to focus on his face. "Help," she whispered. It might have been a question or a plea, maybe both. "That is exactly what I am going to do," Jacob told her. He let her have another small sip of water, then capped the canteen and lifted her as gently as he could, cradling her against his chest as he stood. She weighed almost nothing, and he could feel every one of her ribs through the burned fabric of her dress. Whatever had happened to her, it had been bad, and it had been recent enough that she had not yet had time to die from it. She made a small sound of pain when he shifted her to get a better grip, and he saw her feet dangling limply, the soles shredded and black with dried blood and dirt. "Jesus," he muttered. Then louder to her, "I am taking you home, my home. It is not far. You just hold on, you hear me." She did not respond, but her head lolled against his shoulder in a way that might have been agreement or might have been unconsciousness. Jacob did not care which. He carried her to his horse, a big bay gelding named Remington, who had the good sense to stand steady while Jacob figured out how to mount while holding a half-dead woman. It took some doing, but he managed to get into the saddle with her still cradled against him, her head resting against his heart. He could feel how hot she was even through his shirt, the fever radiating from her like heat from a stove. Dehydration, sun poisoning, infected wounds on her feet, probably other injuries he had not found yet. She needed a doctor, but the nearest one was in Sweetwater, 15 miles away, and Jacob did not think she would survive the ride. His cabin was closer, just 3 miles northwest. It was not much, just 2 rooms and a barn, but it had water from a good well and a bed with clean sheets, and everything he needed to try to keep this woman alive until he could get proper help. He turned Remington away from the Mustang Trail and headed for home at a careful walk, keeping one arm wrapped firmly around the woman to hold her steady. She drifted in and out of consciousness during the ride, sometimes muttering words he could not understand, sometimes going limp and silent for so long he had to press his fingers to her throat to make sure her heart was still beating. "Come on now," he said to her during one of those silent spells. "You did not walk all this way just to die on my horse. Stay with me." Her eyelids fluttered, and he took that as a good sign. The cabin appeared on the horizon as the sun began its descent toward evening, the small structure looking like a haven in the wilderness. Jacob felt some of the tension ease from his shoulders at the sight of it. Once he got her inside, got her cleaned up and cooled down, she would have a fighting chance. Remington knew they were home and picked up his pace to a trot without being asked. Jacob held the woman tighter, absorbing the jostling motion so she would not be thrown around. By the time they reached the barn, she was unconscious again, her breathing shallow but steady. Jacob dismounted carefully, lifting her down and carrying her toward the cabin. He kicked the door open and brought her inside, heading straight for the bedroom. The bed was unmade from when he had left 3 days ago, but the sheets were clean enough. He laid her down as gently as he could, then stood back to assess the situation. Her feet were the worst visible problem. They needed to be cleaned immediately, or infection would set in if it had not already. Her face and arms were badly sunburned, but would heal on their own with time and care. He needed to get fluids into her, get her temperature down, and then he needed to ride for Sweetwater and bring back the doctor. But first, the feet. Jacob went to the well and hauled up bucket after bucket of cool water, filling the large wash basin he kept for bathing. He tore an old shirt into strips for bandages, and gathered the bottle of whiskey he kept for medicinal purposes. The tin of salve his mother had made from herbs and animal fat, and the sewing kit he used for mending clothes and occasionally stitching up injured livestock. When he returned to the bedroom, the woman had not moved. He sat on the edge of the bed and carefully lifted one of her feet, lowering it into the basin of water. The water turned pink immediately, then red, then cloudy with dirt. He worked gently, using his fingers to clean away the debris embedded in her skin, trying not to cause more damage than was necessary. She moaned softly but did not wake. It took the better part of an hour to clean both feet. By the time he was done, he could see the full extent of the damage, and it made him wince in sympathy. Deep cuts, some of which would need stitches. Bruises, blisters that had burst and bled. Thorns he had to dig out with the tip of his knife. She must have walked for miles like this, maybe days. What kind of desperation drove someone to that? He doused the wounds with whiskey, which finally woke her. Her back arched off the bed and a scream tore from her throat, raw and terrible. Jacob held her ankle firm, hating himself for causing her pain but knowing it had to be done. "I know it hurts," he said, his voice rough with emotion. "I am sorry, I am so sorry, but I have to make sure these wounds are clean or you will lose your feet, maybe your life. Just breathe, it will be over soon." She was crying, tears streaming down her sun-damaged cheeks, but she stopped struggling. Her eyes met his and he saw understanding there beneath the pain. She knew he was trying to help. She knew it was necessary. That did not make it hurt any less, but she gritted her teeth and let him finish. When the whiskey was done, Jacob applied the salve, his rough hands as gentle as he could make them. Then he wrapped both feet in clean bandages, working carefully to make sure they would stay in place but not cut off circulation. By the time he tied off the last bandage, the woman had passed out again, her body's way of escaping the pain. Jacob covered her with a light blanket, then went to the kitchen to prepare broth. She needed food, but her stomach would not handle anything heavy. He had beef bones from last week's butchering, and he threw them into a pot with water and a handful of salt, setting it on the stove to simmer. While it cooked, he went back to tend to Remington, removing the saddle and bridle, brushing him down, and making sure he had hay and water. The sun had fully set by the time Jacob returned to the cabin. He checked on the woman and found her sleeping more naturally now, her breathing deeper and more even. The fever was still there, but it seemed less intense than before. He dipped a cloth in cool water and laid it across her forehead, then went to check the broth. It was ready, the liquid rich and golden. He ladled some into a cup and brought it back to the bedroom, sitting on the edge of the bed and gently shaking her shoulder. "You need to drink this," he said. "Just a little bit, it will help." Her eyes opened slowly, focusing on him with more clarity than before. He lifted her shoulders, propping her up against his arm, and held the cup to her lips. She managed 3 small sips before turning her head away. "That is good," Jacob said. "That is real good. You rest now. I will try again in a bit." He lowered her back to the pillow and stood, intending to leave her to sleep, but her hand shot out and grabbed his wrist with surprising strength. Her eyes were wide, frightened. "Do not leave," she whispered. "Please do not leave me alone." Jacob felt something twist in his chest. He looked down at this woman, this stranger who had walked into his life bleeding and broken, and found he could not refuse her. "All right," he said quietly. "I will stay right here." He pulled the chair from the corner over to the bedside and sat down, his hand still caught in her grip. She did not let go, even as her eyes drifted closed again. He sat there through the night, dozing occasionally but mostly staying awake, watching over her, giving her sips of broth whenever she seemed alert enough to swallow, changing the cool cloth on her forehead, checking her bandages. Somewhere around dawn, she opened her eyes and looked at him with full awareness for the first time. "Who are you?" she asked. Her voice was rough from disuse and screaming, but it was steady. "Jacob Jensen," he said. "I found you out on the trail yesterday. You were in pretty bad shape." "Jacob," she repeated, as if testing the name. Then Katherine Anders. "Miss Anders," he acknowledged with a small nod. "Do you remember what happened to you?" Pain flickered across her face, and for a moment he thought she would not answer. But then she said, "My wagon caught fire. I lost everything. I tried to walk to the next town, but I did not know how far it was. I should have stayed with the wagon." "You might have died waiting for help that did not come," Jacob pointed out. "You made a choice. It almost killed you, but you are alive now, and that is what matters." "My feet," Katherine said, and there was a tremor in her voice. "Will I be able to walk again?" "I think so," Jacob said honestly. "They are torn up pretty bad, but I cleaned them and bandaged them. You are going to need to stay off them for a while, give them time to heal." "I was going to ride into Sweetwater today and fetch the doctor, have him come take a proper look." Katherine's hand tightened on his wrist. "Please do not leave me here alone." "I would not be gone more than a few hours," Jacob said gently, "and you would be safe here. But if it worries you that much, I can wait another day. Make sure you are stable first." "I do not want to be a burden," Katherine said, and he could hear the pride in her voice, the same pride that had probably driven her to keep walking when she should have stopped. "You are not a burden," Jacob told her firmly. "You are hurt, and I am helping. That is all there is to it." She studied his face for a long moment, her green eyes searching for something. Whatever she found there must have satisfied her, because she finally released his wrist and relaxed back against the pillow. "Thank you," she said quietly. "I do not know how to repay you for saving my life." "You can start by drinking more of this broth and getting your strength back," Jacob said, reaching for the cup. "And then we will worry about everything else." Katherine managed half a cup this time before her stomach protested. Jacob set the cup aside and stood to stretch his cramped muscles. He had been sitting in that chair for close to 8 hours, and his back was letting him know about it. "I am going to make some coffee," he said. "Will you be all right for a few minutes?" Katherine nodded, though he saw the flash of anxiety in her eyes before she hid it. She was scared, he realized. Scared of being alone, scared of what had happened to her, scared of what would happen next. He could not blame her for that. In the kitchen, Jacob made a pot of strong coffee and scrambled some eggs for himself. He had not eaten since yesterday morning, and his stomach was growling insistently. While he ate, he thought about the situation he found himself in. He had a strange woman in his bed, injured and dependent on him, with no clear idea of when she would be well enough to continue her journey, or where exactly she had been headed in the first place. He needed to get word to Sweetwater, let people know what had happened. Katherine might have family looking for her. She had mentioned trying to walk to the next town, but from where? And why had she been alone? Those were questions that could wait until she was stronger. For now, his job was to keep her alive and help her heal. Jacob finished his breakfast and poured a second cup of coffee, carrying it back to the bedroom. Katherine was awake, staring at the ceiling, her face drawn with pain. "How bad is it?" he asked, setting the coffee on the small table beside the bed. "Hurts," she admitted. "Feels like my feet are on fire." "That is probably good," Jacob said. "Means the nerves are still working. I have laudanum if the pain gets too bad, but I would rather not give you any unless it is necessary. That stuff can be dangerous." "I will manage," Katherine said, and he believed her. There was a core of steel in this woman that her current state of helplessness could not hide. "When you are feeling up to it, I would like to hear the whole story," Jacob said. "Where you were coming from, where you were headed. Might be people worried about you." Katherine's expression shifted, sadness replacing the pain for a moment. "I was traveling from San Antonio to El Paso. My brother lives there. He is expecting me, but I never sent him a specific date for when I would arrive. He will not know to worry for at least another week or two." "That is a hell of a journey to make alone," Jacob observed. "I had a wagon, supplies, everything I needed." Her voice cracked. "I was so careful. I had been traveling for a week with no problems. But the wind changed while I was gathering firewood, and the sparks from my cooking fire caught the canvas. By the time I noticed, it was too late." "I am sorry," Jacob said, and meant it. "That is a hard bit of luck." "All my money was in that wagon," Katherine continued, the words spilling out now that she had started talking. "Every cent I had saved for 2 years. My parents' photograph, my mother's wedding ring, all of it gone." Jacob heard the grief in her voice and knew she was not just mourning the loss of possessions. She was mourning the loss of her future, the plans she had made, the life she had been building toward. "What were you going to do in El Paso?" he asked. "Start over," Katherine said simply. "My brother runs a mercantile there. He said I could work for him, live in the room above the store. It was supposed to be a new beginning." "It still can be," Jacob said. "You just hit a detour along the way." Katherine laughed, a short, bitter sound. "A detour that nearly killed me and left me with nothing. How am I supposed to start over when I do not even have shoes?" "We will figure it out," Jacob said, and was surprised to find he meant the "we" sincerely. He barely knew this woman, but something about her drew him in, made him want to help her in a way that went beyond simple Christian charity. Maybe it was the strength he saw in her, despite her current weakness. Maybe it was the way she had grabbed his wrist and begged him not to leave, trusting him completely even though he was a stranger. Or maybe it was simpler than that. Maybe he was just a lonely man who had found someone who needed him, and that was enough. Katherine's eyes were drifting closed again, exhaustion claiming her. Jacob stood and adjusted her blanket, then quietly left the room. He had work to do. Remington needed proper attention, and there were chores around the place that had been neglected during his 3-day absence. But he found himself checking on Katherine every half hour, making sure she was still breathing, still resting peacefully. By evening, he had convinced himself she was stable enough that he could leave her for a few hours the next morning. Sweetwater was 15 miles away, a 3-hour ride if he pushed. He could be there by noon, fetch the doctor, and be back by late afternoon. Katherine would not like it, but it was necessary. Her feet needed professional attention, and he needed to send word to her brother in El Paso. When he told her his plan over another cup of broth, he saw the fear flash in her eyes again, but she nodded. "You are right," she said. "I know you are right. I just do not like being helpless." "I do not imagine you do," Jacob said with a slight smile. "But sometimes we all need help, whether we like it or not." "Will you be here when I wake up?" Katherine asked, and there was something vulnerable in the question that made his chest tighten. "I will leave before dawn and be back as soon as I can," he promised. "You will be safe here. I will leave water and broth within reach, and I will make sure the doors are locked. Nobody comes out this way much, and Remington will raise hell if anyone approaches." That night, Jacob slept on the floor beside the bed, close enough that Katherine could reach down and touch his shoulder if she needed him. He woke twice to her crying out in her sleep, nightmares about fire and pain, and both times he soothed her back to sleep with quiet words and a cool hand on her forehead. When dawn broke, he woke to find her watching him, her green eyes thoughtful. "You are a good man, Jacob Jensen," she said quietly. He felt heat rise in his face and stood quickly, brushing dust from his pants. "I am just doing what anyone would do." "No," Katherine said. "You are doing more than that, and I will not forget it." Jacob left an hour later, after making sure Katherine had everything she needed within arm's reach. The ride to Sweetwater felt longer than usual, his mind turning over the situation with every mile. He kept seeing Katherine's face, the way she had looked at him this morning, like he was something more than just the cowboy who had found her dying in the desert. Sweetwater was already bustling when he arrived, wagons rolling through the main street, folks going about their business. Jacob headed straight for Doc Wilson's office, a small building near the general store. The doctor was a gray-haired man in his 50s, known for his skill and his tendency to talk too much. "Jacob Jensen," Doc Wilson said when he walked through the door. "Have not seen you in town for a while. What brings you in today? You look healthy enough." "It is not for me," Jacob said. "I found a woman out on the trail yesterday. She is in bad shape. Wagon fire, walked for days on bare feet, sunburned, dehydrated. I cleaned her up best I could, but her feet need proper attention." Doc Wilson's expression turned serious. "How far out is she?" "My place. 3 miles northwest of here." "I will get my bag," the doctor said, already moving toward the back room. "You said a wagon fire. Anyone else with her?" "She was alone. Said she was traveling from San Antonio to meet her brother in El Paso." The doctor emerged with his leather medical bag and his hat. "Foolish thing for a woman to do alone, but I suppose she had her reasons. Let us go see what we can do for her." They also stopped by the telegraph office, where Jacob sent a message to Catherine's brother in El Paso, explaining the situation and assuring him that his sister was alive and receiving care. Then they mounted up and headed back toward the cabin. Jacob found himself anxious during the ride, worried about what they would find when they got there. What if Catherine's fever had spiked? What if infection had set in overnight? What if she had tried to walk and made her injuries worse? But when they arrived at the cabin and Jacob pushed open the door, Katherine was exactly where he had left her, propped up against the pillows, looking pale but alert. "I brought the doctor," Jacob announced, and saw relief flood her face. Doc Wilson introduced himself and settled onto the edge of the bed, carefully unwrapping the bandages on Catherine's feet. Jacob watched his face, trying to read his expression as he examined the wounds. "You did good work cleaning these," the doctor said to Jacob. "Saved her feet, maybe her life. These would have gone septic if you had left them." "Will I walk again?" Katherine asked, and Jacob heard the tremor she was trying to hide. "Oh, you will walk," Doc Wilson assured her. "Going to take time, though. These wounds need to heal from the inside out. I would say 6 weeks before you can put any real weight on them. 3 months before they are fully healed." Catherine's face fell. 6 weeks? But I have to get to El Paso. My brother is expecting me." "Your brother will understand," Doc Wilson said firmly. "You push these too soon and you will do permanent damage. You need to stay off your feet, keep them clean and bandaged, and give your body time to heal." "I sent a telegram to your brother," Jacob interjected. "Explained what happened and told him you are being cared for. He will not worry." Katherine looked at him, and he saw the question forming in her eyes before she asked it. "Where am I supposed to stay for 6 weeks? I have no money, no family here, nothing." "You will stay here," Jacob said, the decision made before he even realized he was making it. "I have the space and you need somewhere safe to recover. It is not a problem." "I cannot ask you to do that," Katherine protested. "You have already done so much." "You are not asking," Jacob pointed out. "I am offering, and besides, what other choice do you have?" Doc Wilson looked between them with interest but had the good sense not to comment. He finished his examination, applied a different salve than the one Jacob had used, and rewrapped Catherine's feet with fresh bandages. "Change these every day," he instructed. "Keep the wounds clean. If you see any red streaks, any swelling, any pus, you come get me immediately. That would mean infection, and infection can turn deadly fast." "I will watch for it," Jacob promised. The doctor left medicines and instructions, accepted payment from Jacob's small stash of savings, and rode back toward Sweetwater with a promise to check on Katherine again in a week. When he was gone, the cabin fell into silence. Katherine was the first to speak. "You should not have paid him." "I will find a way to repay you for all of this." "I am not worried about the money," Jacob said, "and you do not owe me anything." "I owe you everything," Katherine said softly. "My life, my feet, my future, all of it because you stopped to help a stranger." Jacob felt uncomfortable with her gratitude, with the way she was looking at him like he was some kind of hero. He was just a cowboy who had done what needed doing. "Anyone would have done the same," he said again. "But you are the one who did it," Katherine replied. "That matters." The days began to settle into a routine. Jacob would wake early, tend to his horse and the few chickens he kept, make breakfast for both of them, and bring Katherine her meal in bed. He changed her bandages every morning, his hands growing steadily more confident with the task. The wounds were healing, slowly but visibly, the angry red fading to pink, the deepest cuts beginning to close. Katherine was not the kind of person who could sit idle easily. By the end of the first week, she was demanding things to do with her hands. Jacob brought her his mending, shirts with torn seams and pants with holes in the knees, and she attacked the work with the skill of someone who had made her living as a seamstress. Her stitches were small and neat, far better than anything Jacob could have managed. "I could fix that curtain too," she said one afternoon, gesturing to the faded fabric hanging in the bedroom window. "It is about to fall apart." "I am not keeping you here to work," Jacob protested. "I know that," Katherine said, "but I need to feel useful. Please, let me do this." So Jacob brought her the curtain, and she spent 3 days carefully repairing the worn fabric, her needle flashing in and out with practiced efficiency. When she finished, the curtain looked better than it had in years. They talked while she worked, long conversations that ranged from their childhoods to their dreams for the future. Jacob learned that Katherine's parents had died within 6 months of each other 3 years ago, her father from a heart ailment and her mother from the grief of losing him. She had stayed in San Antonio because it was what she knew, but after her mother's death, the city felt empty. "My brother wrote me letters," she told Jacob. "Said El Paso was growing, full of opportunity. He said I could start fresh there, build a new life. It sounded like exactly what I needed." "You still can," Jacob said. "This is just a delay." Katherine's hands stilled on the fabric in her lap. "What if I do not want to go to El Paso anymore?" The question hung in the air between them, weighted with implications neither of them was quite ready to address. Jacob felt his heart rate pick up, but he kept his voice steady when he answered. "What would you want instead?" "I do not know yet," Katherine said, but the way she looked at him suggested she was beginning to form some ideas. Jacob found himself thinking about Katherine at odd moments. While he was chopping wood, he would remember the way she laughed at his stories about ornery cattle. While he was mending fence, he would replay their conversations in his head, analyzing every word, every glance. While he was lying in his makeshift bed on the floor, he would listen to her breathing in the darkness and feel something warm and terrifying unfold in his chest. He was falling for her. It was foolish and inconvenient and probably doomed to end badly, but it was happening whether he wanted it to or not. The problem was, he had no idea if she felt the same way. She was grateful to him, dependent on him, but that was not the same as caring for him. And even if she did have feelings, how could he be sure they were real and not just the natural result of him being the only person in her world right now? He decided not to say anything. Katherine had enough to worry about without him complicating things with romantic declarations. When she was healed and strong enough to make her own choices, then maybe he would tell her how he felt. Until then, he would just be her friend and her caretaker and try not to think too hard about the way his heart jumped when she smiled at him. 3 weeks after Jacob found her, Katherine insisted on trying to stand. Doc Wilson had been out twice more and pronounced her healing well, but he maintained that she needed to stay off her feet for at least another 3 weeks. Katherine was having none of it. "I need to know if I can stand," she argued. "Just for a moment. I will not put weight on them, I just need to know my legs still work." Jacob wanted to refuse, but he understood the need. Being bedridden for weeks would make anyone desperate to prove they were not completely helpless. So he helped her swing her legs over the side of the bed and supported her weight as she slowly pushed herself upright. She swayed, and he caught her around the waist, holding her steady. They stood there, close enough that he could see the flecks of gold in her green eyes, close enough that he could smell the lavender soap he had given her to wash with. "I am standing," Katherine said, and there was wonder in her voice. "Jacob, I am standing." "You are," he agreed, very aware of his hands on her waist, of the warmth of her body against his. Katherine looked up at him, and the expression on her face made his breath catch. There was gratitude there, yes, but there was something else too, something that looked a lot like the feelings he had been trying to suppress. "Jacob," she said softly, "I need to tell you something." "What is that?" His voice came out rougher than he intended. "I do not want to go to El Paso anymore," she said. "I want to stay here, with you, if you will have me." Jacob's heart was pounding so hard he was sure she could hear it. "Katherine, you are not thinking clearly. You have been stuck in this cabin for weeks with nobody but me for company. When you are healed and you have other options, you might feel differently." "I might," Katherine agreed, "but I do not think I will. You are a good man, Jacob Jensen, the best man I have ever known. And somewhere between you carrying me home and you sitting beside my bed and you changing my bandages every morning, I fell in love with you." The words hit him like a physical force. She loved him. This strong, brave, beautiful woman loved him. "I am just a cowboy," he said, because he could not quite believe this was real. "I do not have much to offer. This cabin, some horses, a job that pays enough to get by but not much more." "I do not need much," Katherine said. "I just need you." Jacob gave up fighting. He leaned down and kissed her, gentle and careful because she was still healing, still fragile in ways that had nothing to do with her feet. She kissed him back with a fierceness that belied her current state, her hands coming up to grip his shoulders, holding him close. When they finally broke apart, both breathing hard, Jacob rested his forehead against hers. "I love you too," he said. "I have been trying not to, but I do. I love you so much it scares me." "Do not be scared," Katherine whispered. "We survived worse than this." Jacob laughed, the sound shaky with emotion. "I suppose we did at that." He helped her back into bed, tucking the blankets around her like she was something precious, because she was. She was the most precious thing in his world, and he was going to do everything in his power to make her happy. "When you are healed," he said, "I am going to marry you if you will have me." "Yes," Katherine said immediately. "Yes, 1,000 times yes." The remaining weeks of her recovery passed in a haze of happiness. Jacob still slept on the floor, maintaining propriety even though they both knew where this was heading. Katherine continued to mend his clothes and make small improvements to the cabin, and Jacob started planning for the future. He would need to build an addition onto the cabin, make it bigger for when they had children. He would need to talk to his boss at the Triple Star about maybe taking on more hours, earning more money. He would need to buy Katherine a ring. That last one was easier said than done. Jacob had some savings, but not much, and rings cost money he did not really have to spare. He mentioned it to Katherine one evening and she laughed. "I do not need a fancy ring," she said. "A plain gold band would make me just as happy." "You deserve better than plain," Jacob argued. "I have you," Katherine countered. "That is better than any ring could ever be." Doc Wilson cleared Katherine to begin putting weight on her feet 6 weeks to the day after Jacob found her. She took her first steps with Jacob's hands on her waist, ready to catch her if she fell. Her face was tight with concentration and pain, but she walked 3 steps across the bedroom floor before Jacob insisted she rest. "That is enough for today," he said firmly. "We are not undoing all that healing just because you are impatient." "I want to walk to you," Katherine said. "I want to walk down the aisle when we get married." "We have time," Jacob assured her. "There is no rush." But there was a rush, at least for him. Every day that passed with Katherine under his roof but not his wife felt wrong somehow. He wanted to make it official, wanted the whole world to know she was his and he was hers. 2 weeks later, Katherine could walk the length of the cabin without help. Her feet still hurt, and she could not wear shoes yet because the scars were too tender, but she was mobile again, independent. Jacob watched her move around the kitchen, making coffee and humming to herself, and felt his heart swell with love and pride. "We should set a date," he said. Katherine turned to look at him, a smile spreading across her face. "Whenever you want," Jacob said. "Tomorrow, next week, next month, you name it." "Next month," Katherine decided. "That will give us time to prepare, and it will give my feet time to heal a bit more. I want to wear shoes when I marry you." Jacob rode into Sweetwater the next day to speak with the preacher and make arrangements. The whole town was curious about the mysterious woman Jacob had rescued and was now apparently planning to marry. Doc Wilson had been discreet, but word had gotten out and people had questions. "You sure about this, Jacob?" asked Tom Miller, the owner of the general store. "You barely know this woman." "I know her well enough," Jacob said firmly, "and I would appreciate it if folks would keep their opinions to themselves." Tom held up his hands in surrender. "No offense meant, just looking out for you." Jacob softened slightly. "I appreciate the concern, Tom. But I know what I am doing. Katherine is a good woman, and I am lucky she agreed to marry me." The preacher, Reverend Hayes, was more supportive. He agreed to perform the ceremony in the small church on the edge of town, and suggested that Jacob might want to invite some of the ranch hands from the Triple Star to serve as witnesses. "A wedding is a celebration," the Reverend said. "No need to make it a somber affair." Jacob extended the invitation to his boss and the other cowboys at the Triple Star, and to his surprise, they all agreed to come. Some of them ribbed him mercilessly about settling down, but it was good-natured, and he took it in stride. Katherine spent the weeks before the wedding making herself a dress. Jacob had bought her fabric from the general store, plain white cotton that she transformed with her skill into something beautiful. She worked on it in the evenings while Jacob read aloud from the few books he owned, his voice filling the cabin with stories of adventure and romance. "I wish I had my mother's ring," Katherine said one night, her needle pausing mid-stitch. "I would have liked to wear it at our wedding." "I wish you had it too," Jacob said gently, "but we will make our own traditions, our own memories." Katherine smiled at him, and he saw the shadow of grief in her eyes fade just a little. "You always know what to say." "Not always," Jacob said with a laugh, "but I try." The night before the wedding, Jacob stayed at the ranch, giving Katherine the cabin to herself so they could maintain the tradition of not seeing each other before the ceremony. He barely slept, too excited and nervous to relax. What if she changed her mind? What if she woke up and realized she was making a mistake? But when he arrived at the church the next morning, Katherine was already there, standing in the small vestibule in her white dress, her hair pinned up with wildflowers she had gathered herself. Her feet were bare because shoes still hurt too much, but she had wrapped ribbons around her ankles, white silk that made her look like something out of a fairy tale. "You are beautiful," Jacob said, and his voice cracked on the words. "You clean up pretty well yourself," Katherine replied, and he saw that her eyes were bright with tears. The ceremony was simple and sweet. Reverend Hayes spoke about love and commitment and the blessing of finding someone who made you whole. Jacob and Katherine exchanged vows they had written themselves, promising to stand by each other through hardship and joy, through sickness and health, through all the days of their lives. When the Reverend pronounced them husband and wife, Jacob kissed Katherine with all the love and hope and joy that filled his heart. The small congregation of ranch hands and townspeople who had come out of curiosity cheered, and Jacob felt like the luckiest man alive. They held a small reception in the churchyard, with food and drink provided by the ladies of the town who had taken pity on the young couple. Katherine charmed everyone she met with her grace and her story, and Jacob watched her bloom under the attention. She had been alone for so long, isolated by circumstance and tragedy. It was good to see her surrounded by people, part of a community again. As the sun began to set, Jacob and Katherine said their goodbyes and rode back to the cabin together on Remington, Katherine sitting in front of Jacob, his arms around her waist. She leaned back against his chest, and he felt her relax in a way she had not since he found her. "Happy?" he asked, pressing a kiss to her temple. "So happy," Katherine murmured. "I never thought I could be this happy again." "Get used to it," Jacob said. "I plan on making you happy for the rest of your life." That night they truly became husband and wife in every sense of the word. Jacob was gentle and patient, mindful of her still healing body, and Katherine responded with a passion that took his breath away. Afterwards, they lay tangled together in the bed that was now theirs, her head on his chest, his hand stroking her hair. "I love you, Mrs. Jensen," Jacob said into the darkness. "I love you too, Mr. Jensen," Katherine replied, and he could hear the smile in her voice. The months that followed were the happiest of Jacob's life. Katherine settled into her role as his wife with the same determination she had shown in everything else. She took over the cooking and the mending, planted a vegetable garden behind the cabin, and started raising chickens for eggs. She walked into Sweetwater with Jacob once a week, and slowly, the townspeople who had been skeptical of their whirlwind romance began to accept her as one of their own. Jacob continued working at the Triple Star, but he spent every spare moment on the cabin, building the addition he had planned. By winter, they had a second bedroom and a larger kitchen, and the place actually looked like a home instead of just a bachelor's refuge. Katherine wrote to her brother in El Paso, explaining what had happened and introducing him to her new husband. Her brother wrote back with congratulations and an invitation to visit any time they wanted. Katherine was glad to have his blessing, but she had no desire to leave Sweetwater. This was home now. In the spring, Katherine discovered she was pregnant. She told Jacob over breakfast, watching his face carefully for his reaction. He went very still, his fork halfway to his mouth, and for a moment she worried he was unhappy. Then a grin split his face, so wide and joyful that she started laughing. "We are having a baby," he asked, like he needed confirmation. "We are having a baby," Katherine confirmed, and then she was in his arms, being lifted and spun around while he whooped with joy. Doc Wilson confirmed the pregnancy and said Katherine was healthy and strong, with no reason to expect complications. The baby would arrive in late autumn, October or early November by his estimate. Jacob immediately went into protective mode, insisting Katherine rest more and work less. She tolerated his hovering for about a week before putting her foot down. "I am pregnant, not dying," she told him firmly. "I am perfectly capable of cooking dinner and feeding the chickens. I just want to make sure you and the baby are safe," Jacob protested. "We are safe," Katherine assured him. "But I will go crazy if you try to make me spend the next 6 months sitting in a chair doing nothing." They compromised. Katherine would continue her normal activities, but would ask for help with anything heavy or strenuous. Jacob would stop treating her like she was made of glass. It was not a perfect solution, but it worked for them. As Katherine's belly grew, Jacob found himself talking to it at night, his hand resting on the swell of her stomach, telling their unborn child stories about their future. Katherine would lie there listening, her heart so full it felt like it might burst. "What do you want to name the baby?" she asked one night. "I have not thought about it," Jacob admitted. "What do you want?" "If it is a boy, I was thinking James, after my father," Katherine said. "And if it is a girl, maybe Sarah." "James Jensen," Jacob tested the name. "I like that. And Sarah Jensen sounds just right for a little girl." "We have a few months to decide," Katherine said. "We do not need to settle on anything yet." But as it turned out, they did not need months. Katherine went into labor on a cool October evening, 3 weeks earlier than Doc Wilson had predicted. Jacob had been chopping wood when she appeared in the doorway, her face pale, one hand pressed to her lower back. "It is time," she said, and he heard the fear beneath the calm. Jacob dropped the axe and was at her side in an instant. "Are you sure?" "I am sure," Katherine said, and then her face contorted with pain as a contraction hit. Jacob got her inside and into bed, then ran for Remington. The ride into Sweetwater to fetch Doc Wilson was the longest of his life, his mind spinning with worry. What if something went wrong? What if he lost her, lost the baby, lost everything he had built over the past year? But Doc Wilson was calm and competent, gathering his supplies and following Jacob back to the cabin at a steady pace that felt agonizingly slow. "First babies take their time," the doctor said when Jacob expressed his concern. "We will get there in plenty of time." The labor lasted through the night and into the next morning. Jacob stayed by Katherine's side the whole time, holding her hand, wiping her forehead, offering words of encouragement even when she cursed him for getting her pregnant in the first place. Doc Wilson took it all in stride, checking on Katherine's progress and assuring them both that everything was proceeding normally. Just after dawn, their son entered the world with a lusty cry that made Jacob's eyes fill with tears. Doc Wilson cleaned the baby and handed him to Katherine, who looked exhausted and radiant and more beautiful than Jacob had ever seen her. "James," she said softly, touching the baby's tiny fist. "Hello, James." Jacob leaned down to kiss Katherine's forehead, then his son's. "You did amazing," he told his wife. "You are amazing." "We made a person," Katherine said, wonder in her voice. "Jacob, we made a whole entire person." "Best thing I ever did," Jacob agreed. Doc Wilson stayed long enough to make sure Katherine and the baby were both healthy, then left them alone to begin their life as a family. Jacob sat on the edge of the bed, his arm around Katherine, both of them staring down at the tiny miracle in her arms. "I never thought I could be this happy," Katherine said, echoing the words she had spoken on their wedding night. "After losing my parents after the Wagon fire, I thought my life was over, but it was just beginning." "We both got a second chance," Jacob said. "And I am going to spend every day making sure I deserve it." James was a healthy baby, loud and demanding and absolutely perfect. Katherine took to motherhood with the same determination she brought to everything else, and Jacob discovered he had a talent for soothing a fussy infant. Many nights he would walk the floor with James in his arms, singing old cowboy songs in a low voice until the baby fell asleep. The first year of James's life passed in a blur of sleepless nights and small milestones. His first smile, directed at Katherine. His first laugh, prompted by Jacob making silly faces. His first tooth, which made nursing painful but signaled he was growing strong. When James was 14 months old, Katherine told Jacob she was pregnant again. This time he was less surprised and more immediately practical, asking what she needed, how she was feeling, whether Doc Wilson knew yet. "I just found out yesterday," Katherine said with a laugh. "You do not need to start building another room just yet." But Jacob started planning anyway. They would need more space, especially if they kept having children. He loved being a father more than he had expected to, loved watching Katherine with their son, loved the little family they were building together. Their second child, a daughter they named Sarah as Katherine had suggested, arrived in early summer. She was smaller than James had been, with a cap of dark hair and her mother's green eyes. Jacob fell in love with her the moment he saw her, his heart expanding in a way he had not known was possible. "2 children," Katherine said, cradling Sarah while James toddled around the bedroom, exploring everything within reach. "We have 2 children. We have a family," Jacob corrected. "A real, honest-to-God family." Life with 2 young children was chaotic and exhausting and wonderful. Jacob continued working at the Triple Star, but he negotiated a schedule that allowed him to spend more time at home. Katherine managed the household with efficiency, though she admitted to Jacob in quiet moments that she sometimes felt overwhelmed. "I love them so much," she said one evening, after both children were finally asleep. "But some days, I do not know if I am doing anything right." "You are doing everything right," Jacob assured her. "Look at them. They are happy and healthy and loved. What more could they need?" "I suppose you are right," Katherine said, leaning into his embrace. "I just want to be a good mother." "You are the best mother," Jacob said firmly. "And the best wife. I thank God every day that I found you out there on that trail." "I thank God you did not just ride past," Katherine replied. "You saved my life in every way a person can be saved." As the years passed, Jacob and Katherine's life fell into a comfortable rhythm. James grew into a curious, energetic boy who wanted to help his father with everything. Sarah was quieter, more thoughtful, happiest when she was helping her mother in the garden or playing with the chickens. When James was 5 and Sarah was 3, Katherine became pregnant a 3rd time. This pregnancy was harder than the previous 2, with more sickness and fatigue, and Jacob worried constantly. But Katherine insisted she was fine, and Doc Wilson confirmed that both she and the baby were healthy. Their 3rd child, another boy they named Thomas after Jacob's father, arrived without complications. He was the biggest of their 3 children, with a loud cry and a fierce appetite. James and Sarah were fascinated by their new brother, constantly wanting to hold him and help take care of him. "Our family is complete," Katherine said one night, the baby asleep in her arms, James and Sarah tucked into their beds in the next room, Jacob sitting beside her. "Complete," Jacob agreed. "Perfect." On the 10th anniversary of the day Jacob found Katherine in the desert, they took a ride out to the spot where it had happened. It had been Katherine's idea, a pilgrimage of sorts to acknowledge how far they had come. They left the children with a neighbor in town and rode out together on Remington, who was getting old now but still steady and reliable. Katherine directed Jacob from memory, and eventually they found the place, marked by nothing except the landscape and Katherine's recollection. "Here," she said, and Jacob helped her down from the horse. They stood together, looking out over the desert that had nearly claimed her life. Katherine's feet, once torn and bloody, were fully healed now, the scars barely visible. She wore sturdy boots and a dress she had made herself, her hair pinned up beneath a wide-brimmed hat that protected her from the sun. "I was so scared," Katherine said quietly. "I thought I was going to die out here alone, and no one would ever know what happened to me." "But you did not die," Jacob said, taking her hand. "You survived and you found me and we built this life together." "We did," Katherine agreed. She turned to face him, her green eyes bright with emotion. "I love you, Jacob Jensen. I loved you when you carried me home, and I love you now, and I will love you until the day I die." "I love you too," Jacob said, pulling her into his arms. "You are my whole world, Katherine. You and our children. Everything good in my life came from you." They stood there for a long time, holding each other in the place where their story began, grateful for the twist of fate that had brought them together. On the ride back to Sweetwater, Katherine talked about the future, about watching their children grow, about growing old together, about all the years they still had ahead of them. "James wants to be a rancher like you," she said. "Sarah says she wants to be a teacher. And Thomas is still too young to know what he wants, but I suspect he will surprise us." "They are good kids," Jacob said. "We are raising them right." "We are," Katherine agreed, "and we have a good life, better than I ever dreamed possible." As they approached the cabin, now expanded and improved over the years into a proper house, Jacob saw his children playing in the yard. James was showing Sarah how to rope a fence post, and Thomas was toddling after them, trying to imitate his older siblings. "Home," Katherine said, and the word was filled with contentment. "Home," Jacob echoed. They had started with nothing but pain and loss and a desperate walk through the desert, but they had built something beautiful together, something that would last long after they were gone. A family, a home, a love story for the ages. That night, after the children were asleep, Jacob and Katherine sat on the porch they had built 2 years ago, watching the stars come out over the Texas plains. They did not need to talk. They simply sat together, hands clasped, comfortable in the silence that only comes from truly knowing another person. Jacob thought about all the things that had to go exactly right for them to find each other. If he had been tracking those Mustangs on a different day, if he had taken a different route, if Katherine had stayed with her wagon instead of walking, they never would have met. Their children would not exist. This life they had built would be nothing but an unrealized possibility. But it had happened. Against all odds, in the vastness of the Texas desert, he had found her, and finding her had changed everything. "What are you thinking about?" Katherine asked, breaking the silence. "How lucky I am," Jacob said simply. Katherine squeezed his hand. "We both are." And she was right. They were both lucky, both blessed, both grateful for the fire that had destroyed Katherine's wagon and set her walking barefoot across the desert into Jacob's life. Because that tragedy had led to this triumph, this life, this love. Years continued to pass, marked by the milestones of their children's lives and the deepening of their own connection. James grew tall and strong, apprenticing with his father at the Triple Star Ranch and showing a natural talent for working with horses. Sarah did become a teacher, just as she had predicted, taking a position at the schoolhouse in Sweetwater when she turned 18. Thomas proved to have his mother's artistic talents, spending hours sketching the landscape and the animals around their home. Jacob and Katherine watched their children grow with pride and joy, supporting their dreams and guiding them through challenges. They added onto the house one more time when James married a girl from a neighboring ranch and needed space for his own family. Katherine became a grandmother at 42, weeping with happiness when she held James's daughter for the first time. "Another generation," she said to Jacob that night. "We are starting another generation." "Our legacy," Jacob agreed, his own eyes damp. They grew old together, their hair turning gray, their bodies slowing down but their love remaining constant. Jacob retired from the Triple Star when his joints started giving him trouble, but he kept busy around their property, always finding projects to work on. Katherine's hands developed arthritis that made sewing difficult, but she refused to stop completely, still mending clothes and making quilts for her grandchildren. On their 30th anniversary, their children threw them a party in Sweetwater, inviting everyone they had ever known. The church was packed with friends and neighbors and family, all gathered to celebrate the love story that had started with a wagon fire and a desperate walk through the desert. The Reverend, now elderly himself but still sharp, stood and told the story as he had heard it, of the cowboy who had found the woman dying in the wilderness and carried her home. of how that act of compassion had blossomed into a love that produced 3 children, 7 grandchildren so far, and a legacy that would continue for generations. Jacob and Katherine Jensen are proof that even in our darkest moments, hope remains, the Reverend said. That love can grow from the ashes of tragedy, that 2 people who choose each other every day can build something that lasts forever. Jacob looked at Katherine, and she looked back at him, and in her eyes he saw everything they had been through together. The pain and the healing, the fear and the courage, the desperate nights and the joyful mornings. 30 years of choosing each other, of standing beside each other, of loving each other through everything life threw at them. Worth it, he whispered to her. Every second was worth it. Every second, she agreed. They danced that night, slowly and carefully, mindful of their aging bodies but determined to celebrate. Their children and grandchildren watched with tears in their eyes, moved by the enduring love between these 2 people who had found each other against all odds. As the party wound down and people began to head home, Jacob and Katherine walked back to their house hand in hand, just as they had done countless times before. The stars were bright overhead, the Texas night warm and welcoming. "You ever think about that day?" Katherine asked. "The day you found me." "All the time," Jacob admitted. "I think about how easily I could have missed you, how I almost turned back earlier that morning, how many things had to go exactly right for us to find each other." "I think about it too," Katherine said. "I think about how close I came to dying and how you saved me, not just my life but everything. You gave me a reason to live again, a family, a home, a purpose. You gave me everything." "You gave me everything too," Jacob said. "I was just existing before you, going through the motions. You made my life mean something." They reached their house and stood on the porch, looking out over the land they had built their life on. In the distance, they could see the light in James's house, where their son was putting his own children to bed. Closer by, in the second addition they had built, Sarah's room sat empty, waiting for her visits home from the teaching position she loved. "We did good," Katherine said softly. "We did better than good," Jacob replied. "We did amazing." They went inside, to the bed they had shared for 30 years, and lay down together as they had done thousands of times before. Katherine rested her head on Jacob's chest, listening to his heartbeat, steady and strong despite his years. "I love you," she said, the same words she had spoken on their wedding day, on the day their children were born, on countless ordinary days in between. "I love you too," Jacob replied, the same response he had given every single time, meaning it more with each repetition. They fell asleep that way, wrapped in each other's arms, secure in the knowledge that whatever tomorrow brought, they would face it together. The years continued their march. Jacob and Katherine celebrated their 35th anniversary, then their 40th. Their grandchildren grew and started having children of their own, making Jacob and Katherine great-grandparents. The family tree they had started with just the 2 of them had branched and spread, creating a legacy that would endure long after they were gone. When Jacob was 73, he had a fall while mending a fence and broke his hip. The injury slowed him down significantly, confining him to the house for months while he healed. Katherine nursed him with the same dedication he had shown her all those years ago, and he accepted her care with gratitude and grace. "We have come full circle," he joked one afternoon as she changed his bandages. "You taking care of me this time. That is what marriage is," Katherine said. Taking turns holding each other up. Jacob recovered, though he never regained his full mobility. He walked with a cane after that, and there were days when his hip hurt so badly he could barely get out of bed. But he did not complain. He had lived a good life, a full life, and a little pain at the end was a small price to pay for all the joy he had experienced. Catherine's arthritis worsened as she aged, making even simple tasks difficult. But she adapted, finding new ways to contribute, focusing on the things she could still do rather than lamenting what she had lost. She spent hours with her great-grandchildren, telling them stories about the old days, about wagon trains and desert crossings and the wild Texas frontier of her youth. On a warm spring evening, 2 months after their 45th anniversary, Jacob and Katherine sat together on their porch as the sun set. They were both tired, both feeling their age but content. Their family was thriving, their legacy secure, their love as strong as ever. "If you could go back," Jacob asked, a question he had never posed before, "and change what happened with your wagon, avoid the fire, make the journey safely to El Paso, would you?" Katherine was quiet for a long moment, considering. Then she shook her head. "No," she said firmly. "Because if I had made it to El Paso, I never would have met you. I never would have had our children, our grandchildren, this life. As terrible as that fire was, as much as I suffered walking through that desert, it brought me to you. And you are worth every step I took, every moment of pain, every sacrifice. You are worth everything." Jacob felt tears prick his eyes. "You are worth everything to me too. Finding you that day was the best thing that ever happened to me." They sat together as darkness fell, holding hands, two old people who had loved each other for more than 4 decades, who had built a life together from nothing but determination and hope, and a chance encounter in the desert. When the stars came out bright and clear in the Texas sky, Katherine pointed up at them. "We will be up there someday," she said, "looking down on all of this, on our family, on the life we built. Together," Jacob said. "We will be up there together." "Always together," Katherine agreed. Jacob passed away peacefully in his sleep 3 years later, at the age of 76. Katherine found him in the morning, still and cold beside her, and though her heart broke at the loss, she was grateful he had gone gently, without pain or fear. The funeral was enormous, the church overflowing with family and friends who had come to pay their respects to a man who had lived with integrity and kindness. Katherine sat in the front row, surrounded by her children and grandchildren and great-grandchildren, drawing strength from the family she and Jacob had created together. After the service, after everyone had gone home and the house was quiet, Katherine sat on the porch alone for the first time in 48 years. She looked out over the land that held so many memories and felt Jacob's presence beside her, as real as if he were still alive. "I will be with you soon," she whispered to the wind. "Wait for me." Katherine lived for 2 more years, growing frailer but maintaining her sharp mind and warm heart. She spent her days with her family, passing down stories and wisdom, making sure her grandchildren and great-grandchildren knew where they came from and what they were built on. She died quietly one autumn evening, sitting in her rocking chair on the porch, looking out over the desert that had almost killed her, and instead had given her everything. Her children found her there, peaceful and still, a slight smile on her face as if she could see something beautiful that they could not. They buried her next to Jacob in the Sweetwater Cemetery, beneath a stone that read, "Katherine Anders Jensen, beloved wife, mother, grandmother, and great-grandmother. She walked through fire and found love." The family gathered after the funeral to mourn and remember. James, now 53 and gray-haired himself, stood before his siblings and children and grandchildren and told the story one more time. The story of how their mother had lost everything in a wagon fire, how she had walked for days across the brutal Texas desert, how their father had found her dying and carried her home, how that terrible beginning had led to this beautiful legacy, this family, this love that would endure for generations. "They chose each other every day," James said, his voice thick with emotion. Through hardship and joy, through sickness and health, through all the long years of their marriage. They chose love, and that choice created all of us. We are their legacy, and we honor them by choosing love in our own lives, by standing by the people we care about, by building something that lasts. The family stayed together long into the evening, sharing memories and laughter and tears. They talked about Jacob's quiet strength and Katherine's fierce determination. They remembered small moments and grand gestures, ordinary days and extraordinary events. They celebrated 2 lives well lived and a love story that would never be forgotten. As the stars came out over Sweetwater, Texas, bright and eternal in the vast night sky, the family felt the presence of Jacob and Katherine watching over them, together as they had always been, their love transcending even death. The house that Jacob and Katherine had built together remained in the family, passed down through the generations. James's son eventually took it over, raising his own children within those walls, teaching them about the great-grandparents who had started it all with nothing but courage and love. The story was told and retold, becoming part of family lore. Children who had never met Jacob and Katherine grew up hearing about them, learning from their example, understanding that real love was not just a feeling but a choice, a commitment, a daily decision to stand beside someone through whatever life brought. Years turned into decades. Sweetwater grew from a small frontier town into a thriving community. The wild Texas frontier that Jacob and Katherine had known became civilized, tamed, transformed. But the land remained, constant and enduring, a reminder of where they had come from and what they had survived. And on quiet evenings, when the wind blew across the desert and the stars shone bright overhead, it was easy to imagine them still there. Jacob, carrying Katherine home across the barren landscape. Katherine, walking down the aisle on feet that had been torn and broken but had healed strong. The 2 of them, building a life together one day at a time, one choice at a time, one moment of love at a time. Their story had started with fire and pain and desperate survival. But it had grown into something beautiful, something lasting, something that proved that even in the darkest moments, hope endures. That love can bloom in the most unlikely places. That 2 people who find each other against all odds can build something that lasts forever. Jacob Jensen had been just a cowboy tracking Mustangs across the Texas plains. Katherine Anders had been just a woman trying to reach her brother in El Paso. But together, they had been everything. Partners, lovers, parents, grandparents, the foundation of a family that would continue long after they were gone. And though their bodies had returned to the earth, though their voices were silenced and their hands stilled, their love remained. In the children they had raised, in the grandchildren and great-grandchildren who carried their blood, in the house that still stood strong against the Texas wind, in the stories that were told around dinner tables and campfires, in the example they had set of what it meant to truly love another person. They had walked through fire, both literal and metaphorical. They had survived pain and loss and hardship. They had built something beautiful from ashes and hope. And in the end, that was everything. That was the whole story. A cowboy who found a woman dying in the desert and carried her home. And a love that grew from that moment of compassion into something eternal, something unbreakable, something that would never, ever die.